This is my Kerry drill. It's a Kerry Super 8, so it's 8 speed, but it uses back gearing as well to achieve this. It's very heavy, it's about just under 100 kilos, but as you can see it's in a little bit of a poor state and it could do with a bit of a refresh. The motor itself is probably too big for what this is, and the pulley's damaged as well, so time to change. I start off by removing the motor. It's pretty straightforward, it's just 4 bolts. The motor was only wired in to the mains, which isn't the safest thing in the world, so this will get changed as well. Once the motor's off, the motor mount comes off, it just slides out. Then I start to remove the back gearing mechanism. This is the frame that holds it all together, and then out it all comes. I'll explain how it all works as I put it back together again. The handle has a roll pin which I hammer out and then it unscrews. This is the quill return spring, so you just unscrew the locking nut and out it comes, and then out it slides. And this is the quill. Once the quill's removed, it's time to lift it off. It's pretty heavy. Once on the bench, it's time to give it a quick examine, then strip more down. Here I'm trying to remove the nameplate, but it's a real pig. It's getting to the point where I'm starting to damage the plate, so I change tactics. So I've brought it over to my milling machine to try and get a bit more accurate drill to drill out the rivets. Once the main body is fully stripped, I'll just use a wire wheel on an angle grinder to strip it all back, same as what I did before with the saw. Once all the paint's off, I then start to fill up my ultrasonic bath and put in some special cleaner as well. Once it's up to temperature, about 70 degrees C, I then lower in the main body and switch it on and leave it for about an hour. Once it's ready, I pull it back out with a scrubbing brush. As it's hot, all of the oils and the old grease comes off very easily, and it dries very quickly as well. Once it's dried, I put over a light amount of filler just to give it a bit more of a smoother surface. Then I masked it all up and started to paint. I did exactly the same process with all the other major components, so I won't bore you with those. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to video painting the main colour on top, but I just used exactly the same process as what I did with the big saw, and it came out perfectly well. So here I'm removing the table, which is not in the best condition. Then I unbolt the main pillar, which thankfully is in excellent condition. The chrome plating is still perfect. So stripping apart the main table assembly, it all comes apart relatively easily. Some of them are incredibly tight, but get there in the end. Again, same process for the base. Used some filler again to smooth it out. Here I wasn't happy with the quality of the handles, so I decided to make my own ones using stainless steel bar and then copy the handles on my lathe. So this is the bar that I'll be using. So first thing I need to do is chop it down using the saw that I restored earlier in the year. Once I've got 3 sections, I can go over to the lathe. So over onto my lathe. I'm now just getting the threads ready. I have to do this 6 times. Thankfully both ends are the same thread, so I can keep the same settings on the lathe. It's a relatively straightforward job to do. It's going to be 18 turns per inch. So on this lathe, what we do is we look at this. Okay, so on here, we want 18 turns per inch. So these are threads. We want 18, which is here. So it's A2. Gear slot 2. Oh, it's already in there because I use it quite often. So 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So it's in number 2, and it's A. So at the moment we're on B, so that needs to come up. It doesn't go in straight away, just give it a little turn. There we go, and it's popped in. So it's on A2, which will give us 18 turns per inch. And to engage the thread turning, we have to turn that, push it into there. And now it's ready for thread turning. So here I'm doing a test cut first. I've painted it black so that I can see where the material is being removed, and then I use this thread measuring gauge to determine that it is 18 turns per inch, which it is. And so I carry on going slightly deeper each time with each pass, and eventually I end up with an 18 turns per inch thread. Test. Perfect. I'm just going to do the same on the other side, and then do it with all 3. And we've got some new handles. So, let's put it together. There we are. Look at that. Happy with that? Much better than before. So this is the items all painted up, ready for assembly, and as usual it seemed to take more time to remove the masking than anything else because the masking tape was a little bit too sticky. But once it was off, it's time to put it all together, and I start off with the base and the pillar, and it uses a sort of like a clamping cylinder to hold it tight in place. So giving the shaft a quick clean, it's looking much better. So next step, table. So this is the main bracket for the table, which slides onto the pillar, and then once it has a clamp that goes in, and once that's clamped up I can remove the masking tape and start to install the rest of the components for it. You have to line up the 2 markings to keep it straight, and then all tightens off, scrape the last of the paint off and the masking tape, and then the main table can then sit on top. Really don't like that table. It's very beaten up, not by me. Eventually I will change it out. You can see all these drill holes here, it's horrible. I then place the main body onto the pillar. It comes on and off throughout the build just because I've not put one of these together before, so it was a bit of a learning curve. So here the spindle is being disassembled, so out comes the chuck with a wedge tool, and then it's time for a very difficult moment of removing the circlips. Wanker, 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 wanker. Eventually they come out, and then you have to use a press to remove the bearings as they're all press fit. And once they're out, then I can carry on with the job at hand. And eventually the bearing that was stuck onto the spindle really did not want to come out. I tried heat, eventually it was just a case of using absolute brute force to pull it off. Yay! Then it's time to put in all new bearings, which Kent Bearings in Kent, obviously, were kind enough to supply all the correct size new bearings, and they fitted perfectly. But again, I had to fit them the same way they were removed. So with the press, you can see here that I've made a bit of a mistake, which I don't realise at the time, which is I haven't put the grease caps on the bearings. That's the spindle. So now I give the spindle a jolly good grease and lube, then it slides in, and then from there I can put in the, I suppose it's a pinion gear, because it works like a rack and pinion. Again, you have to make sure you put the spring in the correct way for the quill return, but I can adjust that later. This is the bearing sort of retainer ring, but it was very beaten up, so I managed to put it in a vise and straighten it back out. Then it just lines up. Bearing needs to sit on here, but before I do, I'm just going to give it a quick strip down and re-grease it. It's in very good condition. You can see the workings of the back gearing here. There's a pin which you have to remove, which again will be explained later. That's the main pulley mechanism, and you've got two holes that the pin can sit in to lock it out. So the pulley can be independent of that gearing mechanism. So that pin engages with the two holes and forces it to spin with the gears, or you can pull the pin out and then it spins freely. So this is a weird, strange washer, packing washer, and then the bearing gets pressed on in the press and eventually it goes back on. This large cast brackety thing sort of holds everything in place. But before I can do anything, the new bearing needs to sit on top, so that gets pressed in, and also this little bracket which supports the top cover has to go in first. Then this cam gear goes in, and as you can see as I'm turning it, the gears move in and out. The idea of that is to engage and disengage the back gearing. Before I can put the control knob on, you just have to align it correctly so it's maximum depth before you install it, and then I test run it by. You can see that as I turn the pulley, the gear on top is going slower, and that's with it engaged. And then once it's disengaged and the pin is inserted, it has to run at the same pace as the pulley. But again, later on, once it's running properly, you get to see it working the way it's supposed to work. So now you can see it engaged and then disengaged, and so the speeds change. Back of the machine, this is where the motor mount goes, so the two sliders have to go in first, otherwise the alignment will be wrong, and then the plate is bolted on. Then I put the handle on. The handle is a reverse thread, and then once it's on, I put on a new roll pin which goes in that hole there, and that's the roll pin, and it's just hammered in place. Once it's on, it's time to put the readjust the return spring. So I've taken it off. Now it's back on again, and then you have to wind it back using whatever tools you can find, and then lock it in place to give it enough tension. But you don't want too much tension either, because when you come to lower the quill, you can actually break the spring. Back on the lathe now, I'm making a pin. This is to stop the quill from rotating, because all there's a little groove that goes down the length of the quill, about 6 millimeters wide, and the pin goes into that groove and stops the quill from spinning. And it's just falling right into my fucking haystack. Wanker. Once I knock up a second one, because I lost the first one, it pops straight in perfectly. It's a very good fit. And as I lower it, you can see that it doesn't move. This is the top cover now. The paint quality wasn't perfect on this one, but I was still quite happy with it. This wasn't planned to be a perfect drill, because I'll be using it a lot, so it's not going to be a show queen, so to speak. The front sort of logo was just tapped in using the original rivets that it came with, because I was able to tap the old ones out from the rear and it didn't damage them. This here is the locking mechanism to keep the head from moving on the pillar. And here you can see I've had to remove the bracket for the top cover again. I didn't know that you can only put it on one way, which is incidentally this way, so I got it wrong the first time. This is a motor that I had in the shed. It's a lot better condition than the previous motor. It's a lot smaller as well, which was what I wanted, because this is going to be sitting deep into a corner. So I assembled it all together. I didn't really have to do anything to the motor. Although the paint's a bit chipped in places, it's otherwise very, very clean, and it works perfectly well. Okay, so I've managed to get the drill in its position. The wiring is now complete. It's a bit of a pain to do. I've had to do it off camera because it took absolutely ages to get the wiring right, because it uses a relay, starter relay inside it, so it's got like a safety thing. So if I press it and then power somewhere in here, if I switch it back on again, it doesn't run. So it's got a safe on-off switch. Motor is on, all back together. So next up is just to finish off the finishing touches, and then we're pretty much there. This is a grease nipple. You just put a grease gun on it, and then it injects grease into the quill to stop it from wearing. Then the depth gauge went on. This polished up quite nicely on the bench grinder with a wire wheel, so nothing else was required for that. It uses a Morse taper 2 drill chuck attachment, and you just have to make sure that it's clean and push it up quite firmly, otherwise it can fall out. I also didn't like the original bolt that was used, or wing nut even, for retaining the motor. It was quite horrible, so I'm now using a grub screw, which is well, it's a lot nicer. So here it is, all finished. Looks really good, really pleased with how it's come. I've also installed the maker's plate on the side there with the rivets. Also got a clamp here which you can move around and clamp your work. So, back gearing. What you do, so at the moment it's running fast, so I press start, and away it spins, and what you do is you lift this up it comes. So we can see our pulleys, 1, 2, 3, 4 for 4 speeds. To get an additional 4 speeds, what we do, looking over the top, we've got this handle here, we lift that and turn it 180 degrees and it drops back down. And what happens is, I'll do it with this open, see the gears? They turn on a cam, so it's moved away and it turns freely. Turn it back, have to get it just right. It's difficult when you're filming at the same time. There we go. So now it's in. Now it's engaged with that bottom gear. And there's another one at the top there, which it's also engaged with. Now you also have to remove a pin, which is that one there. You lift it. So now what happens is, as this turns, you can see the gear above is moving slower, so it's now independent of that gear, whereas before the pin would move with the gear. So that gear is connected to the spindle. So now when I switch it on, it's going to go a lot slower. So what I'll do now is I'll show you it in its slowest form. Okay, I've now changed the pulleys to the top level. So small pulley to big, which gives it a slower speed. Close it off, start, and see it's a lot slower, which is good for tapping or very large size drill bits. So yeah, drills all finished. Very pleased. So to turn back gearing off, I'm going to turn that knob at the top, that one there, and it 180 drops down. So now this rotates independently. See that moving? But that still turns. And then the pin, got to find it, pushes back down into one of those 2 holes that we saw earlier in the video. There it is, got it. So it's engaged now. So now press start, spin it up. That's it. Jobs are good. Really pleased. It's got to find a new one of those now. Job's a good one.